You're watching France 24. Time now for business, which I'm joined by Owen Fairclough. Let's head straight into the markets. Owen, and the Euro debt crisis hanging heavily over that, of course.
I'm not sure if it's reassuring, Chris, or refreshing to have a bit of business as usual. At least we know where we are with this Eurozone crisis after a brief hiatus over the holidays. It's right back on the agenda with a vengeance, and the markets are reflecting those jitters. Yes, the European markets have opened up, but only slightly, as you can see there, just a fraction up for most of the markets. And yeah, a lot of the news flow is very negative. You can take your pick, really. French banks like SocGen making redundancies, UniCredit having to issue more shares at half their value to try and get some more capital. The Asian markets, a similar kind of picture, really. The Nikkei finishing the day nearly 1% in the red. Pretty choppy, as you can see. The Hang Seng spent much of the day in the green, but has lost some of those gains, though still trading up, as you can see. Shanghai and South Korea both down. Just one stock to watch today as well, and indeed for the next few days, is Kodak. Maybe, just maybe, the first household name to go under in 2012. That's because it's lost 90% of its value over the past 12 months. On Wednesday on US markets, it took another beating, losing another 29%. You can see now its shares trading at less than 50 cents. Remember, just a few years ago, Kodak shares were around $30 each. So huge slide for this company. It's refusing to confirm market rumours and indeed speculation in some of the US financial press that it is on the verge of some kind of bankruptcy protection.
OK, well, let's turn to the Eurozone now, because Greece is once again proving why it's the country to fear in the debt domino. Its leaders have given the crisis even more urgency by setting a date for the moment their country could crash. Luke Schrago reports.
3 months. That's the time limit Greek Prime Minister Lucas Papademos has given unions to agree on labour reforms or face crashing out of the euro.
Without the agreement and the funding linked to it, Greece faces an immediate danger of an uncontrolled default in March.
Greece needs the EU and the IMF to sign off on doling out the next part of its €130 billion emergency funding agreed in October. Without that, it can't refinance some $14.5 billion in bonds set to mature in March. But the nation's unions are digging their heels in over cutting salaries.
With regards to the national collective labour contract and the minimum wage of the poor worker, we say we are not willing to take a single step back.
Some 900,000 Greeks are already out of work, leaving the government in fear of further unemployment. This in a nation that doesn't seem set to return to growth anytime soon.
Well, let's just stay with the whole bond story. Worth noting that the French government is going to hold its first big auction of the new year just a little later this Thursday morning, planning to try and sell off between 7 and 8 billion euros in anything ranging from 10 to 25-year paper. Remember that the French are under severe pressure right now. They've been put on credit rating watch. And there's lots of fears that France may lose its AAA credit rating. So it needs to show that it can attract investors to take on its debt and also be able to finance pretty much the rest of Europe right now with all those different bailouts.
OK, well, let's stay in France now for the latest in our series marking 10 years of the euro. The single currency is often blamed for rising prices here. Many French consumers think the cost of their beloved baguette has gone up disproportionately since the euro replaced the franc. But the reality is more complicated than that, as Ketavan Gorjestani explains.
In France, the baguette is the ultimate price reference, and in this bakery, customers all agree its price has increased since switching to the euro.
Yes, since the euro, prices have jumped. I think that when we switched to the euro, they hiked their prices.
In 2000, a baguette cost 4 francs and 40 cents. That's about 67 cents in euros. Today, the same baguette costs 90 cents, a 34% hike. But for this baker, it isn't the euro that is to blame, it's rising commodity prices.
Take sugar, for example. Sugar prices have almost doubled. What can we do? At some point, we have to translate that into our prices, and it's not an exaggeration.
10 years ago, prices were rounded up to the nearest euro, from 5 francs to 1 euro, from 10 francs to 2 euros. But that had a very limited impact, just 0.3% in the first year. Since the switch to the euro, prices in general have increased by 1.7% per year. Not a shocking increase, according to some experts.
Over the past 25 years, that's how prices have increased, just under 2%. So what we can say is that yearly inflation over the past decade has been similar to what we've observed over a longer period.
There are, however, some disparities. Prices in the service sector, like restaurants or plumbing, have skyrocketed. But buying a car or a TV is now cheaper than it was 10 years ago. On average, prices haven't increased more because of the euro, but salaries didn't follow, and that's what reduced French people's purchasing power.
You know, I bought a baguette yesterday. It was an organic one. I think it was nearly €2. But hey,
that's what if you have expensive taste.
That's what you exactly right. Let's leave that alone for the moment and pick up on a few more of the day's business headlines for you. Staff at bankrupt ferry company Sea France have rejected President Sarkozy's suggestion to turn it into a cooperative using their redundancy money. The cross-channel operator is at risk of liquidation without up to €50 million of funding. Sarkozy is backing a plan for the 800 staff to run the firm, a subsidiary of rail operator SNCF themselves. But unions say the cooperative idea doesn't give staff enough job security.
Chinese airlines are refusing to pay new European charges on carbon emissions. The EU system of trading permits to emit CO2 was extended to airlines from the 1st of January. It's supposed to make them pay pollution charges for flying in and out of Europe, but the deputy head of China's airline lobby said national airlines won't comply and they're considering countermeasures against the EU.
Well, there are plenty of low-emission cars on display at New Delhi's biggest and best auto show. The wraps have come off the models and the glitz is fully on. It's the biggest ever show this year for Indian car makers and indeed Western car makers who are flocking to India to try and beat a recession in Europe and slowing growth in countries like the United States. Natasha Butler is there for us.
Well, there are 50 automakers from around the world at the Delhi Auto Show, and around 50 vehicles will also be launched right here over the next few days, making it India's biggest auto show to date. Now, the theme here is green, which means fuel-efficient cars, and electric cars will be getting a top billing. It's a nod, in a way, to rising fuel prices. But the really big story here is the fact that there are so many foreign companies. That's because while battered economies around the world are seeing car sales dip, right here in India they continue to rise. The economy is doing well, growing 7% a year, so a cashed-up middle class is spending more money on cars than ever. So that's why we're seeing car makers like French company Renault showing big here for the very first time in India. Renault, BMW, Volkswagen, Ford, just some of the big names that are all here today as well. So what we're seeing is all these foreign companies racing to get a share of the world's second fastest growing car market. But perhaps the most interesting sign is the big change on the automotive map, and that's the fact that Jaguar Land Rover has decided to ditch the Detroit Auto Show, the prestigious car show in America, for Delhi right here.
That was Natasha Butler in New Delhi. I should say we did speak to Jaguar and they claim that they didn't really have to choose between Detroit and Delhi because they did exhibit at the LA Auto Show, but they still did make a choice to come to India instead of Detroit. We also asked Jaguar if, with Indian growth slowing down for the next year, stock market prices sliding, whether perhaps Jaguar had missed the boat a little bit on the whole emerging economy story. Here's Adrian Hallmark, the head of Jaguar's global branding.
So there's lots of forecasts and evidence of slowing down of the rates of growth in certain developing economies. But those developing economies are still growing at big single-digit levels. So from our perspective, the BRIC markets will not replace what we currently have. It's not a zero-sum game. They will complement what we have. And whether they complement it a bit more or a bit less than we thought is not decisive for us in the next 2 to 3 years.
And very quickly, Owen, something fishy to finish off with.
Indeed, the catch of the day. This is officially the most expensive tuna in the world. It set a new record at Tokyo's main fish auction, main fish market. Fetched a $730,000. That is just for one fish, weighing in at around 270 kilos. So a new record to start the new year in Japan, where people traditionally pray for a little bit of good fortune in business.
That is one pricey fish. Owen Fairclough, thanks very much for that roundup of the business news. Do stay with us here on France 24. Claire Pride will be back very shortly with all the latest news.